This is going to be, I think, the hardest expansion to evaluate of all of the expansions I've evaluated, because firstly, the card pool in Standard is bigger than it has ever been. Shit. On top of that, cards in this set are very interesting design wise. There's a lot of just stuff that doesn't fit current archetypes, stuff that pushes other archetypes, a lot of really elegant design, and a lot of obviously insane power level, because it's the final set of the year, and the final sets of the year are always usually pretty pushed in terms of power level, because it's Blizzard's sort of like last hurrah before you get a big rotation. So keep that in mind when looking at the cards like in a vacuum, because some of them are obviously going to be insanely powerful. But yeah, we'll be going through each class, judging the cards, just not really off of any real metrics, just based on, where I expect them to see play and how instrumental they will be in an upcoming meta. And I'm only going to be evaluating them between now and about a month's time. So this is not like an overall meta sort of analysis. I think it will more so be like, what will the meta look like between now and the theoretical supplemental set that comes out. And I think the interesting thing about this sort of analysis will be, whether or not I can accurately predict what the supplemental set will do for the metagame, and whether or not decks that currently exist will get more support with the set, or if the meta will completely shift in response to new cards because they are being pushed. And I guess that will be easier to elaborate when we get to certain cards later in the set. So I think we should just start officially with the first card, Felscream Blast. It's a 1-mana common Demon Hunter spell. It has lifesteal, deal 1 damage to a minion and its neighbors. So this is a similar style card to a Shooting Star, which was a mage spell during the Boomsday Project expansion. Only it has lifesteal. The important thing, I guess, to take away from this card compared to Shooting Star is that Shooting Star was printed in a set with a lot of a spell damage theme. Spell damage +2 was printed on multiple cards during the set, which sort of pushed the power level of Shooting Star and Tempo Mage at the time. Felscream Blast doesn't have that advantage in Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter does not have access to spell damage as part of its base set. Spell damage is only really accessible through neutral cards, but there are decent neutral cards being printed all the time. What does this card mean? Well, the thing with Demon Hunter right now is that they sort of have an abundance of cards that have similar effects, right? Like Felscream Blast is similar to Immolation Aura is similar to another card in the set. However, I think the thing that will keep Felscream Blast from standing out amongst those other mediocre cards is that Felscream Blast has lifesteal, and there is a minor payoff for lifesteal in the set with one of the Demon Hunter legendary cards, which has enough upside, I think, to potentially put Felscream Blast into a playable deck, which is this Il'gynoth OTK, which sounds crazy, but I think with refinement it might actually be competitive. Which is where I expect this Felscream Blast to see play. Aside from that, 1 health is not good enough as a board clear, so this won't see play in control or mid-range decks because it doesn't actually hit any important breakpoints health-wise. This is more used as combo potential in an OTK Demon Hunter deck running Il'gynoth for the lifesteal. Throw Glaive. It's a 1-mana rare spell. Deal 2 damage to a minion if it dies, and a temporary copy of this to your hand. So another sort of strange, functional, or almost functional reprint of the Echo mechanic, right? Where if you play the spell, you get a copy of it back in your hand. But this has a caveat where a minion has to die to get the extra copy. Throw Glaive is a good rate. Like 1 mana for 2 damage is pretty good. That's almost like a backstab without the condition. But where this suffers a lot is no real Demon Hunter decks want to run this kind of effect. As I said before, like with Felscream Blast, Demon Hunter already has a lot of good small removal that is better. Think about it this way, right? Immolation Aura is 1 extra mana on this, and it does 2 damage to all minions instead of just 1 minion at a time for 1 mana. Well, this is flexible. It just doesn't fit into any current Demon Hunter archetypes. Demon Hunter currently runs a lot of aggressive strategies. And they don't need Throw Glaive. They have more flexible and much easier to function removal than Throw Glaive. I think this is interesting with Ultras the Outcast in some aspects, but when I think about it, Altruist is going to be dealing damage to minions, which means that while it might make some throw glaive targets easier to get another copy of throw glaive back into your hand, it might also throw glaive off and make the card more clunky and dysfunctional to use. Redeemed Pariat is a 2-mana common minion. It's a 2/3, and after you play an outcast card, gain +1/+1. So this, you don't have to actually outcast the outcast cards to get the benefit on this card, which is nice, but this kind of effect is extremely weak in current meta. Like, stats just don't matter that much. Building stats like this doesn't matter unless it's like a buff and makes things like this is really hard to sort of quantify as how powerful this really is, but it's definitely on the weak side. The reason why Undertaker in Hunter was so good way back in the day was for 2 reasons. One, because a lot of the best minions that you'd normally run in your deck anyway were Death Rattle minions. And on top of that, removal right then was very limited. So it was really easy to scale a Undertaker that came down on turn 1 and then grew basically infinitely every turn because you were always playing Death Rattle minions. Redeemed Pariah also suffers from the weakness in that Demon Hunter doesn't run a lot of outcast cards in their deck right now. And on top of that, running a lot of outcast cards in your deck is kind of self-crippling because they will compete with each other. Running outcast cards usually means you want to get the outcast effect off of a lot of them, and a lot of cards will be weakened by not getting their outcast effects. So again, you're kind of causing some sort of internal conflict within your deck by running a heap of outcast cards just to pay off a 2-mana 2/3. Doesn't seem worth it to me at all. Next up is Acrobatics. Acrobatics is a 3-mana common spell. Draw 2 cards, and if you play both this turn, draw 2 more. This seems to me like the best Demon Hunter card in the set. At a baseline, it's just Arcane Intellect, but with an insane amount of upside. If you manage to play both of the cards, it's a sprint for 3 mana. In low to the ground, like aggressive curve Demon Hunter decks, which I think this card sort of pushes you more towards because of how efficient it is. This is insane. It seems like an auto-include in Odd Demon Hunter in Wild, because they only run a small handful of cards above 3 mana. The most expensive cards in their deck being, of course, Leroy, Lotheb, Double Glaive Bound Adept, and Baku the Moon Eater. That's 5 cards in your 30-card deck. So Acrobatics, I think, will get there a lot of the time in the late game, especially considering that deck was lacking critical draw, because a lot of the best draw in Demon Hunter is even costed, so they can't actually utilize it. So I think Acrobatics is a card that you should expect to see a lot in Demon Hunter, as it pushes more aggressive strategies without having to run things like Skull of Gul'dan. This won't fit into Soul Shard Demon Hunter though, as your Soul Shards are not going to be following the restrictions, so they will cripple your chance to actually play both of the cards you draw from this to draw more, which I think weakens it significantly. Next up is Dreadlord's Bite. It's a 3-mana common weapon. It's a 3/2 with the outcast to deal 1 damage to all enemies. So warrior weapons commonly have this kind of effect, where on play they will deal 1 damage to all minions. Blood Razor, for example, Death's Bite on the Death Rattle had a similar kind of effect to this. So this is really efficient. Another thing to note too is that 3-mana 3/2 weapons do often see play. Eaglehorn Bow, for example, sees a bit of play in Hunter. So in aggressive Demon Hunter decks, I can see this being used if you don't care about Soul Fragments and don't really want to run Marrow Slicer, and you want more damage as opposed to healing with Eldrachi Warblades. You could also run this alongside the Warblades, because, I mean, running 2 weapons is like running 2 different weapons isn't that bad in aggressive decks. And this is efficient. I mean, even if you don't outcast it, it's not the worst thing in the world. Might go into those Acrobatics decks. Next up is Line Hopper. It's a 3-mana common minion, so 3/4, and your outcast cards cost 1 less. This is kind of like a Sorcerer's Apprentice in Mage, right? Except that Sorcerer's Apprentice, the pool of cards that it can discount is a lot larger, especially in a class that has a lot of cheap spells that will benefit a lot from being discounted, I should say. The other thing too is that this suffers from the same sort of weaknesses that the Pariah suffers from. where you don't want to be running a bunch of outcast cards in your deck because they'll compete with each other, even though you don't need to have these cards be outcasted to make them cost less. Again, this is a premiumly statted minion, but I don't think outcast payoffs are necessarily going to make a deck work. I think Demon Hunter wants things that are less clunky, more efficient, and I think Line Hopper just doesn't really fit into that sort of lean, aggressive strategy, is how I'll say Demon Hunter is usually built. And again, I don't think there are any real major benefits to playing this card, apart from like playing Skull for cheaper. But even then, like, is that even good? Next card is Relentless Pursui. It's a 3-mana common spell. Give your hero +4 attack and immune this turn. I actually think this card is decent. It compares much less favorably to Twin Slice. Twin Slice is 2 mana for 4 attack, and you don't get the immune, but it's much more flexible because it gives it to you in 2 spells, and you can sort of utilize it how you like. But gaining immunity is not anything to sneeze at, considering that Demon Hunter sometimes will just use its face for removal, and there are some payoffs in the set for giving your hero extra attack. And paying 3 mana to give your hero 4 attack when there are some 2 and 3 attack weapons in the set is really decent, like Eldrachi Warblades, like the 3/2 weapon we saw earlier. Another thing I think I'd like to point out too is that this might just slot into that Il'gynoth OTK deck if it's competitive, because it's a way to buff your Eldrachi Warglabe's attack, even if it is a little bit of an expensive rate. I think this card is going to be underrated quite a bit and might be frustrating because it's just a little bit of extra reach in those aggressive decks as well, even if it is slightly clunky to use potentially. Next up is Insatiable Felhound. It's a 3-mana 2/5 with Taunt and Corrupt, gain +1/+1 and lifesteal. It's a demon. Corrupt is the new keyword in the set. You trigger the Corrupt keyword by playing a card from your hand that is higher mana cost than the card with Corrupt. So for example, Insatiable Felhound, if you play 4, 5, 6, etc. plus cost minion from your hand, it will corrupt this card and it will gain the corrupt effects. Most cards can only be corrupted once, and this is the first one we've seen in the set. In terms of how I feel about Corrupt more broadly, I think it is something that will need to be played with to truly get an idea of how potent it is. But it goes against a lot of what Hearthstone's core philosophy is about. Hearthstone, for the longest time, is mostly about using your mana as efficiently as possible and, playing to the best tempo you can, even in control decks. The thing with control decks is while they don't necessarily play Curvestone, what they do is they try to use as little mana as possible to answer your opponents who have used a lot of their mana, if that makes sense. So if someone spends 8 mana on a card and you use 2 mana to remove that card, you've gained a lot of advantage in that interaction. Corrupted cards sort of break the mold in that a lot of them are pretty terrible vanilla base minions, but they become much better if they're corrupted. But to corrupt them, you're potentially ruining that curve and tempo in your deck to make them work. However, as a caveat to that, control decks are going to be able to use corrupt cards to much greater effect because they aren't playing on a curve and they just want to use their cards as efficiently as they can, not as on curve as they can. So in saying that, Insatiable Felhound seems like an awkward Demon Hunter card to use because it kind of isn't fitting into any current archetypes in the class. While I agree that a 3-mana 2/5 with Taunt is a decent rate at a baseline, and a 3-mana 3/6 with Taunt and Lifesteal is really good against aggro, it's going to be hard to get this online early enough when you would want to make it valuable, right? The way that this would work is that you would corrupt it on turn 4, because that's the earliest you can corrupt it, or turn 3 with the coin, admittedly, and then you're playing this on turn 4 on coin, or turn 5 without, and that might just be a little too slow for a card like this, but it might not. It's kind of meta dependent, and it sort of depends on whether or not you can get these corrupted cards out on time. I think that this is an interesting card and one probably to watch as this meta develops, not just in the next month but over maybe another standard rotation. But as it stands right now, there's no home for this to go in but it is certainly a potent anti-aggro card. Next is Felsteel Executioner. It's a 3-mana epic minion. It's a 4/3. It's an elemental with Corrupt to become a weapon. The thing with cards like this is that Demon Hunter already has great weapons. We saw the 3-mana 3/2 weapon earlier. You have Marrow Slicer in Soulshard Demon Hunter, and you have Eldrachi Warblades, which is just a good, efficient Demon Hunter weapon. So this does not actually outclass any of those weapons in any capacity, even though it is technically 12 damage for 3 mana. The awkward thing about this card is that you will have to corrupt it. It's best used in aggressive decks, and aggressive decks are going to struggle to use corrupt cards because not only does it ruin their tempo, it also potentially is a problem to run the card in your deck because you don't necessarily run high mana cost cards in aggressive decks. You want low curves because you're not wanting to draw, 7, 8, 9 mana cards. So even if you do manage to corrupt this, you're not playing it until turn 5. And while a 5 mana 4/3, while on turn 5 a 3 mana 4/3 weapon is pretty good, especially considering there are high attack payoffs in the set, I don't think you need to run Felsteel Executioner when Marrow Slicer is still in the standard format and will be for as long as Felsteel Executioner is. Next is Zai the Incredible. This is a 5 mana 5/3 legendary minion. It has a battle cry to copy the left and rightmost cards in your hand, and notably it does place those cards to the next to the left and rightmost cards in your hand. This kind of effect is rare in Demon Hunter, so Zai might just see play because there isn't enough of this kind of effect, but I don't really know if that's the case because Demon Hunter doesn't really need this kind of effect. Card draw most of the time is going to be just better unless you're playing a specific combo where you want extra copies of certain cards, in which this is incredible at that. However, there are a couple of awkwardnesses and awkward sort of plays and clunky things that come with this card. One of them being it is difficult to get the rightmost card on your hand to be a card you actually want to copy. And on top of that, you typically want to be copying cheap cards, right? Like copying a Twin Slice with this is really good. Copying, small, efficient cards is really nice. But if you manage to copy something awkward that's going to sit in your hand and potentially compete with your outcast cards, like Skull of Gul'dan, it's going to weaken your deck quite a lot. And I think Demon Hunter is the kind of class that much prefers to just draw the good cards from their deck rather than make copies of cards already in their hand. There was a good point made about this card in that it doesn't actually find you resources. It doesn't necessarily make your hand better. It just makes your hand more potent at what it can already do, if that makes sense. I don't think that's really the point they were trying to make. But yeah, it's a difficult card to use, and I think that was going to hold it back quite a bit. Next up is the Bladed Lady. This, alongside Acrobatics, is an extremely potent card. It's a 6 mana rare minion. It's a demon with Rush, and it costs 1 if your hero has 6 or more attack. While that seems like a steep condition to meet, Demon Hunters often can get to 6 attack, especially in Soul Fragment Demon Hunter currently. That's a Marrow Slicer and a Twin Slice. That's a Lapidary and a Hero Power. However, some of those combos are a bit clunky to pull off. Hero Power plus Lapidary is 6 mana already, so yeah, you are paying a 1 mana for a 6/6 with Rush, but you did have to invest 6 mana on the same turn anyway. I don't think that will matter too much though, as Lapidary isn't often played on curve or on turn 6 with the Hero Power. And that also doesn't really apply to the Marrow Slicer turn, because you can set up the Marrow Slicer attack, then on the next turn Twin Slice Bladed Lady. What's cool about Bladed Lady 2 is that it allows you to potentially remove problematic minions and taunts that are in the way in the Soul Shard Demon Hunter deck and allow you to keep your burst damage going, and potentially save you either using your face and wasting that burst damage, or using one of your few removal spells or Blade Dancers to clear problematic minions. I think Bladed Lady is an auto-include in a lot of Demon Hunter decks, especially those running weapons, and Twin Slice is automatic. It's just a really easy card and powerful card that's easy to play in basically every Demon Hunter deck. So expect to see Bladed Lady in many decks. I also like the play that this card is. It's a play on the bearded lady from the circus, but it's the bladed lady. I think that's very clever. Probably the second best Demon Hunter card in the set, following Acrobatics. Next up is Stiltstepper. It's a 3-mana 4/1 epic minion. Battlecry, draw a card. If you play it this turn, give your hero +4 attack. I guess the thing to note with this card is that at a baseline, it's a 3-mana 4/1 that draws you a card, which isn't terrible. It's aggressively statted, but the 1 health is painful and really easy to remove against most classes. I guess the dream with this card is to play it in a low curve aggressive deck, like Odd Demon Hunter in Wild, for example, where drawing the card will usually be like a one drop, where you can play that and then you're dealing 4 damage with your face, which might just go towards your opponent's face and be really aggressive. That's not bad, but this card I think is one with definitely a slight awkwardness to it, but might see players just, hey, it's card draw and it's a body. Like, if your opponent is using 2 mana to remove this, that really isn't bad if you're, you know, dealing 4 damage and, you know, drawing a card off of it, which is not going to be too difficult to pull off, I think. Next up is Il'gynoth. It's a 4-mana legendary minion. It's a 2/6 with lifesteal, and your lifesteal damages the enemy hero instead of healing you. So this is an enabler for some combos in Standard with Moarg Artificer, Eye-Beam, or Eldrachi Warblades. Anyone who has been playing the Standard format in Scholomance Academy can tell you that Eldrachi Warblades turns with lots of buffs with Soulshard, Lapidary, and Twin Slices are a common occurrence. And perhaps Il'gynoth just slides into that deck as a way to turn potentially useless healing from those Eldrachi Warblades into damage that can, you know, overthrow your opponent and destroy them. I think Il'gynoth will see some experimentation in Soulshard Demon Hunter. Whether it remains in that deck might take some time, and whether that deck even sees play in the next meta remains to be seen. I don't see why it wouldn't. It's not losing anything, and it still has good matchups from what I could tell from the meta. But maybe Il'gynoth will not see fit in that deck, and maybe instead the OTK Il'gynoth will be the dominant. I feel like that won't be the case, especially not right away, since a deck like that is going to take time to develop. But I'd say watch out for this one in the future if more lifesteal cards get printed and more weapon/attack buffs get printed in Demon Hunter, while Eldrachi Warblades is always available. It's part of the Demon Hunter basic set. Next up is Renowned Performer. This is probably the worst card in the set so far that we've seen. I don't think it is the worst card full stop, but it's definitely one of the weaker ones. It's a 4-mana common minion. It's a 3/3 with Rush, with a death throw that summons 2 1/1 assistants with Taunt. What's cool about this card is that you can deal 3 damage to a minion with this, and then you just get left with 2 1/1 Taunt bodies, which might just be annoying to deal with. That being said, I don't know where you would put a card like this, and there really, honestly, isn't too much to say about it other than it looks kind of mediocre, and there's no real home for this right now. Even in token decks, you have better token generators and better ways to deal 3 damage, right? Like, the 2 1/1 assistants with Taunt off the Death Rattle are probably not worth running this over, like, an Eye-Beam, for example, or a weapon. Finally, for Demon Hunter, we have the Expendable Performers. It's a 7-mana epic spell. Summon 7 1/1 Illidari with Rush, and if they all die this turn, summon 7 more. This has been confirmed by one of the devs on Twitter, that not all 7 have to be summoned and die to get the extra 7. It's just that if you summon 6, for example, if all 6 die, you will get 6 more. Which really honestly benefits this card quite a lot, as it allows it to be used more flexibly with token payoff cards like Wrathscale Naga, for example. I do have this in my current token Demon Hunter build, which I think will be an interesting deck to try, but I don't think it competes with Soulshard Demon Hunter as a competitive deck, and I don't think Expendable Performance is a card that will push Demon Hunter over the edge more generally. It is potentially 14/14 worth of Rush in one card for 7 mana, which is really good. but I think you want to be using this card in a deck that can get major payoffs for it. And that makes it kind of awkward. So overall, Demon Hunter gets some interesting tools for potential OTK decks with Il'gynoth, some Outcast synergy with Line Hopper, Redeemed Pariah, and then there's a couple of like generally good aggro cards with Bladed Lady, Dreadlord's Bite, and Acrobatics. It'll be interesting to see where the class goes throughout this expansion, and what the supplemental set coming in a month's time will do to shake up the meta in this class. And I don't think that any of these cards are good enough to push Demon Hunter in a direction away from Soul Shards. But I do think there are some cards here that maybe incentivize new builds of Demon Hunter to come to the fray. Acrobatics in particular is a card that I think is especially potent in the upcoming metagame. Unfortunately, because it means that aggro is still potentially a list that will be out there. Time for the Druid cards. This is the first one. It is Faire Arborist. It is a 3-mana common minion. It's a 2/2. Choose one, draw a card, or summon a 2/2 treant. Corrupt is do both. So the interesting thing about this card, from my first sort of thought was, oh, this is just bad in Quest Druid, right? It's a choose one card that doesn't immediately go into Quest Druid because the Corrupt just does the effect of the quest anyway. And I think that actually does hurt the card, because in that sense, it's just an inferior version of Rising Winds. I don't think a 3-mana 2/2 draw a card is good enough in Druid. I think that's actually rather fair compared to cards they currently have in the metagame. And a 3-mana summon 2/2/2s wasn't played anyway. Landscaping was a card in Druid that probably wouldn't see play right now. And corrupting this, while easy to do, is okay at best, but you could just run Quest Druid, which I actually think will be a Druid deck again this expansion, given that Guardian Animals has fallen off quite a lot. I have built a few different Druid lists, all of them messing with different styles, and I think there's a possibility for all of them to see play. I'm not sure which I'm the most confident in being the best, but that remains to be seen. Next on the list here is the Moontouched Amulet. It's a 3-mana rare spell. Give it your hero +4 attack this turn, and if you corrupt it, you gain 6 armor. So there was a card in Whispers of the Old Gods called Feral Rage, I believe, which is really similar to this, that did see play. 3 mana for +4 attack is basically the same effect as the Feral Rage. And Feral Rage was a choose one, where you could gain the 4 attack like this card does, or you could gain 8 armor on a choose one. This has the benefit of, if you corrupt this, you can just gain the 6 armor and gain the 4 attack. So it kind of is similar to that Demon Hunter card we saw before, where you gain the immune, where in some cases gaining 6 armor is actually better than being immune, because you'll be killing a small minion and keeping some of that armor. I don't think that Druid wants a card like this right now. Spell Druids don't really use their hero to attack, and the upside of gaining 6 armor on this card can be also done in better ways, through healing, or through using cards like Stag Beetle, I believe it's called, or Steel Beetle, which gives you firearmor for holding a 5-cost spell. So yeah, not sure where the home for this card is going forward. I haven't managed to get Corrupt Druid built. I think maybe that will be a deck that sees play in the next expansion. And then not the next expansion, in the after the supplemental set. I guess I can mention this now. My sort of theory for how the supplemental set will go is that it will feature more corrupt cards that will push Yasharaj decks a little bit harder if they aren't super potent in the current expansion, which I don't believe they will be. As you would have noticed, I haven't said anything about Yasharaj when it comes to these corrupt cards as of yet, because I don't think that any of them are potentially good enough to be used in a Yasharaj style deck, and Moontouched Amulet definitely doesn't fit that mold. Whether or not that is the case in a month from now, when the supplemental set is out, and hypothetically a bunch more corrupt cards are printed, remains to be seen. Next up is Umbral Owl. It is a 7-mana 4/4 beast at rare. It has Rush, and it costs 1 less for each spell you've cast this game. Druid right now actually does use quite a lot of spells, so it won't be too hard to get this down to a cheap enough mana cost where you feel fine playing it. And something that I think is really interesting about this card is that it gets the buffs from Embiggen without the downside, because playing Embiggen will actually reduce the cost, so it keeps balanced. In a deck that runs plenty of spells, this will see plenty of play, and I've actually got it in a Embiggen style Druid list right now, which I think actually is one of the decks I think will be potent in the upcoming meta as well, is Embiggen Druid. You can see different flavors of Embiggen. Right now I think I have a N'Zoth build and one without that I think runs strength in numbers. I can't really remember off the top of my head. I've been theory crafting and building all day, but Umbral Owl I think is a card not to be slept on, as cards that can potentially cost 0 mana, especially when they can be buffed in deck, are ones to keep an eye out for sure. Next is Fizzy Elemental. It's a 9 mana 10/10 elemental at rare. It has Rush and Taunt. This seems like a card that is built for more N'Zoth based Druid builds, and it is pretty good if you summon it off of your N'Zoth, but it is a little awkward to play otherwise. A 9 mana 10/10 with Rush and Taunt is fast stats, and sometimes will be enough to keep you alive, and this is decent to ramp to, but I'm not sure how good N'Zoth Druid will be. Personally, I think N'Zoth decks are going to be at best with a Highlander package, because running too many cards just for N'Zoth payouts will feel awkward, I think, because of the simple fact of you don't want to run a bunch of mediocre cards in your deck just to make a 1 card a payoff. That being said, Fizzy Elemental I think is decent enough on its own to see potentially play enough to make N'Zoth Druid work, but it might take some refinement, I think. One thing I will say though is that since this is an elemental, it does compete with Zephrys, so you can't actually run a Highlander Druid N'Zoth build with Fizzy Elemental if you have Zephrys, or you could just run the risk of potentially resurrecting your Zephrys. Maybe that is enough maybe that's not that bad of a risk, and you're just fine with potentially resurrecting a 3/2 instead of a 9 mana 10/10 if you have other tribes that are worth resurrecting. Next is Cenarion Ward. It's an 8 mana epic spell, gain 8 armor, and summon a random 8 cost minion. So in a vacuum, this doesn't seem all that great, right? It seems kind of fair. You get an 8 cost and you gain 8 armor. That's whatever. That's like a Moonglaive portal for 2 extra mana. You get a 2 mana more minion and you gain 8 armor instead of 6 health. However, where I think this card is really interesting is with Kael'thas plays and Solar Eclipse. Solar Eclipse is a new card from the set that will cause any spell you play after it to be doubled, and doubling the effect of Cenarion Ward for 2 extra mana is pretty awesome. The only problem I have with that is where do you put the Cenarion Ward and Solar Eclipse combo? Do you just run it in a Spell Druid deck? Do you run the Owl in that deck? What else are you running to supplement this? You can't just use Cenarion Ward and Solar Eclipse. You need to have other cards in that deck, because I don't think that those cards on their own are good enough to just run in a deck, like slide in as a package into other decks, like in Embiggen. Maybe Cenarion Ward is good in Quest Druid, because they tend to ramp quite a lot, and you probably do run Kiri and the Eclipses in Quest Druid, or maybe just Kiri, and Cenarion Ward is a decent payoff for that. I had trouble building this into decks, but perhaps this is so good with Solar Eclipse that it pushes Druid towards that gameplay. Maybe they even run things like Yazeal Windsinger. So you play your Yazeal, you play Solar Eclipse, you play Cenarion Ward, and a bunch of cheap spells. Yazeal is going to be really good overall, because there are a lot of really big spells in Druid now. I think enough to make Yazeal potentially really good, but she still suffers a little bit from being a 9 mana 5/5 that is difficult to combo with other cards. But Cenarion Ward is a nice big spell if you can combo it with other stuff. Next up is Greybough. Greybough is a 5 mana 4/6 legendary minion. He has Taunt, and Death Rattle give a random friendly minion Death Rattle summon Greybough. So this is potentially an infinite minion. However, this is a little clunky to use. So it doesn't immediately summon a Greybough. It gives a minion a death rattle that will summon Greybough, right? So this dies, it gives a death rattle to a minion that when that dies will summon a Greybough. And then when that Greybough dies, you just keep this loop going on and on and on and on again. The thing is that you want a lot of minions to make this work, and I feel like Druid doesn't have decks that run that many minions, except for maybe Embiggen. Does this work in Embiggen? Perhaps. Maybe it's good in Embiggen. It's also really good with like a Vectus, for example, because both the death rattles here I think can be summoned off of Vectus. Don't quote me on that. The first one can at the very least. And Archmaul Mashifin is a decent death rattle card you can summon off your Vectus as well. So that's like a minor death rattle package for Druid, but it's also like it sort of suffers from the same problem I think as the Cenarion Ward does, and a couple of other and like the Owl and like you have a lot of different Druid archetypes right now that have support. You have Quest Druid, you have Embiggen, and then you have smaller packages like the Greybough Death Rattle package, like the Kiri Cenarion Ward package, that don't really slot into pre-existing archetypes and aren't fleshed out enough to make their own decks. I mean, you also still have Spell Druid and token stuff going on as well. Like, is Greybough good in a token tempo style deck? Not really. A 5-mana 4/6 taunt is not the kind of card you really want in that kind of deck, even one with this sort of survivability and inevitability. This is also really weak to silence effects, which perhaps might be prevalent in the meta, given that Priest has a super great silence that there's no reason they shouldn't run it. Demon Hunters are running silences right now, Devolving Missiles is common, and Shaman is getting a new transform effect, which is basically a silence. So yeah, it might be tough for Greybough to see the light of day in this upcoming meta. Next up is Kiri, Chosen of Elune. She's a 4-mana 2/2 legendary minion with a battle cry to add a Solar Eclipse and a Lunar Eclipse to your hand. Solar Eclipse and Lunar Eclipse are two 2-mana spells. Lunar Eclipse deals 3 damage to a minion. Your next spell this turn costs 2 less. And Solar Eclipse makes your next spell this turn cost twice. The strength of Kiri is that she generates 2 cards for you, 2 good cards at that. She allows you to run duplicate copies of the Eclipses in Highlander decks, which is really good. And I think that she will see play in Quest Druid as a way to just have more of these Eclipses. While we're on the subject, we may as well, if you review the Eclipses alongside her. Lunar Eclipse is an insane card for Druid, and one that I think that they will utilize quite a lot. Being able to, this is essentially free if you play another spell alongside of it, kind of like a Nature Studies. So you can deal 2 damage you can do 3 damage to a minion, and then you can Wrath that same minion, which is really nice. This will help you against Paladins when they play things like their Goody 2 Shields on 3, which was a difficult minion for you to remove as Druid. I think this might even be good enough to replace Bogbeam in Druid, because the face of this card is a lot easier to use. I think a card that is almost auto-include in Druid as a way to help you get to your ramp cards and then ramp into your bigger stuff, as it allows you to kill problematic minions in the early game. The next one, Solar Eclipse, I think is a little bit more awkward. Solar Eclipse certainly can reap the benefits with powerful combos alongside things like the Cenarion Ward, like Survival of the Fittest, for example, with Kael'thas turns. Again, there are a lot of big spells that if you double with Solar Eclipse are really good. The thing is that that's really awkward to sort of differentiate, and Solar Eclipse is a really bad top deck and a bad card to draw when you don't have great ways to combo it. So one I think that is going to be awkward to use, but when you do use it will be potent. I think the reason why Kiri Chosen of Elune is going to be such a potent card in Druid going forward is because she allows you to gain the Eclipses when you need them. Yeah, I think Kiri will see a lot more play than Greybough going forward in control style Druid decks, because she has flexibility, which makes her quite potent. The last Druid card we're looking at today is Guess the Weight. Draw a card, guess if your next card costs more or less to draw it. So on average, this should draw you, I think, 1.7 cards, I think I was told. Look, I'm not the math guy. I just regurgitate bullshit people tell me. In heavy decks with heavy curves, this is kind of good because it'll be easy to predict whether your card will cost more or less. But I don't think this will see play in Druid right now because they already have good card draw. They have Overgrowth. They have Nourish in Quest Druid. There's just a lot of ways in Druid to draw cards. You could use Fungal Fortunes in Spell Druid. You can also use Rising Winds, which I think is all better than this because they have more flexibility than Guess the Weight. Even though Guess the Weight could be a 2-mana Arcane Intellect some of the time. It just seems like an awkward card to use. And one that, while flavorful and fun, isn't going to help the Druid control game plan in the long run. That's Druid. So overall, Druid has a bunch of conflicting archetypes. Like you have the Embiggen stuff, you have Quest, you still technically have Guardian Animals, you have N'Zoth, and then you have smaller packages with things, yeah, like Cenarion Ward and Solar Eclipse, like Greybough, Vectus, and the Prime. And whether or not, and whichever one of these is going to be come out on top for Druid remains to be seen.